Have you ever noticed that some people don't live waiting for blessings? They live waiting for rejection? Not because they did something wrong, but because pain taught them that nothing good lasts, and that every hope must come with defense. How many times have you walked into places already expecting to be discarded? How many times did you hear a compliment but waited for the criticism right after? How many opportunities did you turn down not because of a lack of faith, but out of fear of getting hurt again? Sometimes your biggest problem was never rejection, but what rejection taught you to expect from life. Because some people were not discarded by God. They simply learned to live as if they were. You may have survived childhood trauma, family abandonment, or an emotional rejection that was never healed. You may have learned to make yourself smaller, not to ask, not to dream too big, just to avoid being hurt again. But what if this hidden life is not the end of your story? What if God is working precisely where you think you were forgotten? Today you will understand why some people live on the margins even while carrying a promise. Why silent pain shapes broken identities, and how divine mercy redefines destinies without erasing wounds. This is not just an emotional biblical story. It is an invitation to see your own life through different eyes. Because sometimes the table is already set, and the greatest challenge is believing that you are allowed to sit. The story of Mephibosheth reveals something uncomfortable and liberating at the same time. Not all pain comes to destroy you. Some pain comes to hide you until the right time, and this challenges everything we believe about failure, delay, and personal worth. Mephibosheth was the grandson of King Saul and the son of Jonathan, David's closest friend. While he was still a child, only 5 years old, he suffered a fall during a desperate escape after the death of his father and grandfather, leaving him crippled in both feet. Out of fear of retaliation, he was taken to Lo-debar, a forgotten, distant place marked by isolation and hopelessness. There he lived hidden, far from the palace and far from the royal identity that belonged to him. His story is recorded in 2 Samuel chapter 4, verse 4, and takes a new direction in 2 Samuel 9, when David decides to call him to the table because of an ancient covenant. The fall that defines a life. Imagine this. Mephibosheth was only 5 years old when everything changed. The news of Saul and Jonathan's death arrived like a shock, and a desperate escape became the scene of childhood trauma. The fall marked his body, but it also reached his soul, producing emotional wounds, emotional rejection, and an early sense of family abandonment. Some pain arrives too early, and when it does, it shapes the way you begin to see yourself. That is where a broken identity is formed. Quiet but deeply rooted. Over time, physical pain turns into silent pain, and fear becomes a constant companion. You learn to hide, to live in defense mode, carrying deep shame and the fear of being rejected. But here is the inspiring truth. Not every fall ends a destiny. In many emotional biblical stories, the fall is only the beginning of something greater, where God's grace begins to work behind the scenes, even when you have not realized it yet. He lived hidden, expecting the worst. Do you see how pain changes the way a person lives? Mephibosheth is taken to Lo-debar, a place with no pasture, no word, and no hope. A perfect symbol of deep shame and a hidden life. There he grows up believing that surviving is safer than being seen. When the soul experiences emotional rejection too early, it learns silent strategies of protection. And one of the most common is shrinking yourself so you won't draw attention. Over time, living hidden becomes routine, and expecting the worst feels like wisdom. Grandsons of kings were usually killed, so Mephibosheth grows up anticipating rejection, carrying emotional suffering and wounds of the soul that no one sees. Maybe you know this pattern well, avoiding conflict, settling for less, silencing dreams, all out of fear of losing even more. But something is moving beyond what the eyes can see, because not every weight is in vain, and this story has not yet reached the moment when divine mercy decides to interrupt the hiding, an identity broken by fear. When you spend too much time living under the weight of emotional rejection, your self-image begins to collapse from the inside. Mephibosheth does not see himself as an heir. He does not perceive himself as part of God's promise. He sees himself as a burden, someone who gets in the way. Deep shame blends with the fear of being rejected, and pain stops being just an experience and becomes an identity. That is how a broken identity is formed, shaped more by fear than by truth. And notice how words reveal what the soul believes. He calls himself a dead dog. When no one calls you by your name for too long, you begin to accept the worst label available. Pain settles into the wounds of the soul, creating silent emotional suffering and distorting personal worth. Perhaps you too have defined yourself by failures, losses, or old rejections. But there comes a moment when someone calls you back to your spiritual identity, and that is where everything begins to change. When grace arrives without warning, can you imagine the impact of that call? Mephibosheth is remembered not because of merit, but because of a covenant he did not build. David chooses to honor Jonathan, and God's grace manifests in an unexpected way, breaking years of forgetfulness. When the summons reaches the palace, he does not expect an embrace but a sentence, because those who have lived under social rejection learn to confuse being called with danger. But the logic of the kingdom works differently from the logic of fear. Where Mephibosheth expected death, he encounters unexpected honor. Where he anticipated humiliation, he is given a place at the table. Divine mercy touches his emotional wounds and begins a quiet biblical redemption. Perhaps you too are expecting judgment in some area of your life, without realizing that God's promise is about to reveal itself as unearned favor, opening the way to something even greater. Sitting at the table while still wounded. Pay close attention to this powerful detail. Mephibosheth remains crippled. The wound does not disappear, the past is not erased, and the childhood trauma is not rewritten as if it never existed. But now he eats at the king's table, surrounded by honor, dignity, and presence. This reveals something profound about inner healing. God does not always remove the pain, but he completely changes where you are seated in life. This is where true spiritual restoration takes place. The wound remains, but personal worth is redefined. The limitation continues, but restored dignity becomes visible to all. God's grace does not deny the wounds of the soul. It surrounds them with purpose. Perhaps you still carry marks that have not disappeared. But when God calls you to the table, he is declaring that your story does not end in pain. And that prepares your heart for an even deeper transformation. The wound did not define his destiny. Notice how this restoration happens in silence. Mephibosheth does not take the throne, does not become a hero, and does not enter history as a victor in human terms. Even so, he lives honored, sustained by the grace of God and by divine mercy. The pain is not denied, the emotional wounds remain present, but they no longer govern his identity. This is real spiritual restoration, when the wound loses the power to decide who you are. There is something deeply liberating here. You can carry scars without carrying deep shame. Mephibosheth's spiritual identity is no longer defined by emotional suffering, but by the preserved destiny that God sustained. Perhaps you also did not become everything you once imagined. And that is okay. When pain no longer gives the orders, inner transformation begins to take place, preparing your heart for a conclusion that still reveals something greater. The story is not just about him. Mephibosheth was not rejected because of who he was, but he learned to live expecting rejection. Emotional rejection came early, blended with childhood trauma, and created emotional wounds that quietly shaped the way he saw himself. Over time, silent pain became an inner language, and a broken identity began operating on autopilot. Not because he was unworthy, but because no one taught him to expect anything different. And perhaps without realizing it, you also learned to survive that way. Maybe this story is not actually about a crippled man, but about people who are still living in hiding. People marked by deep shame, fear of rejection, and family abandonment, who learn to shrink their dreams to avoid new pain. People who carry wounds of the soul while trying to look strong on the outside. People who confuse silence with peace and isolation with protection. If this sounds familiar, it is because this emotional biblical story is still unfolding every day. The table is still set before you, and that changes everything. The question is not whether you are worthy, because God's grace has already settled that through divine mercy. The real question is whether you will accept the invitation to sit, even while still wounded, and allow restored dignity to redefine your personal worth. When that happens, shame loses its grip, spiritual restoration begins, and the preserved destiny finally finds room to manifest. Before we close, I want to invite you to something simple and necessary. Not to a public response, nor to forced exposure, but to an honest pause. The kind the soul quietly asks for. A moment for you to recognize what you have been carrying alone, and to acknowledge that not every pain needs to remain hidden. The story of Mephibosheth is not only about someone who was forgotten, it is about people who learn to live expecting rejection. If this story touched you, stay here with me. There are other silent battles that need to be revealed, and perhaps one of them speaks directly to your own story. Prayer. Lord, you know every silent pain, every hidden wound, and every fear we carry without words. Touch now the places where rejection tried to define our worth. Heal what was broken on the inside, and remind us of who we are in you. May your grace restore dignity, bring peace to the soul, and teach us to accept the place you have prepared for us. Amen.